The moment my father pointed at me in court and said, "That's her, the liar who tricked a dying man," I stopped being his daughter, not because I was guilty, but because he needed me to be. He looked right at the judge, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing, and said it loud enough for the world to hear, like he'd been waiting years to call me that. I didn't flinch. I'd faced worse. But something in me cracked in that instant, louder than any gavel, deeper than any courtroom silence. Because when your own father tries to bury you just to protect his pride, you realize you're not just defending yourself anymore. You're defending the truth he was too ashamed to carry. My name is Nicole Harris, and this isn't a story about inheritance. It's about the war I never saw coming, the one that started the day I came home. I landed in Charleston under a gray summer sky that hung heavy, like it knew what was waiting for me. My boots hit the pavement outside the terminal, and not a single familiar face met me. No handshake, no hug, not even a message. I told myself I wasn't expecting one. The ride home took 20 silent minutes. I watched Spanish moss blur past the windows as the car turned onto the familiar gravel drive. The Harris estate hadn't changed. The red brick roof still sloped toward the marsh. The porch still creaked. And yet, everything felt quieter. I knocked once. The door opened without resistance. My mother stood there in a linen blouse and pearl earrings. She gave me a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're home," she said, then turned toward the kitchen. I followed the faint smell of coffee and dust. Inside, my father sat where he always had, behind his polished cherrywood desk, reading Financial Digest like it still ran the world. He looked up only long enough to offer a nod. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Then he turned the page. Cole, lounging on the edge of the leather sofa, glanced at me over his phone, then went back to scrolling. I stood there in full dress uniform, polished metals catching the afternoon light, suddenly feeling like a guest in my own childhood. Dinner was no warmer. The table had been set like we were hosting a senator. Crystal glasses, candles, folded napkins shaped into swans. No one said grace. No one asked how I'd been. No one said welcome home. Instead, the family attorney, Leonard Green, cleared his throat and pulled a file from his briefcase. 6 weeks before Admiral Harris passed, he made significant changes to his estate plan. "Mr. Green said, all assets, including real estate, investments, and the Harris Veterans Fund, have been designated to Captain Nicole Harris." No one congratulated me. My father's hand tightened around his wine glass until his knuckles turned white, then red. His voice cut through the candlelight. "You manipulated a dying man." Mom reached for his wrist. "Richard, please." He pulled away. "This won't stand. I'll make sure of it." I pushed my chair back before the entree hit the table. My appetite was gone anyway. As I stepped into the hallway, my eyes landed on the framed photo of Grandpa in full uniform, standing tall beside the very compass he once handed me. "You'll carry this when I'm gone." I didn't know where it was leading yet, but I knew where it started. And this time, the battlefield wasn't across the ocean. It was at my own dinner table. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived, stamped in bold red. Court summons. I opened it standing in the middle of the living room in my temporary rental, a small place overlooking the Ravenel Bridge. The words on the page didn't make sense at first. Filed by Richard A. Harris. Charges: forgery of testament and manipulation of a vulnerable adult. My own father had filed suit against me. I sat down, the paper still in my hands. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking, but my chest felt oddly hollow, as if the betrayal had landed somewhere deeper than anger could reach. I called Lieutenant Colonel Collins in Naples. He answered on the first ring. I told him what was happening. He paused, then said only one thing. "You're a soldier. Handle it like one." So I did. I started gathering my records, my orders, my NATO clearance, my deployment schedule. I pulled everything from my secure drive and matched it against the dates in the complaint. And that's when the second blow hit. The plaintiff, my father, had submitted an email as evidence. An email sent from my official NATO address, dated 3 weeks before my grandfather passed. Proceed with the will update. He won't resist. It was addressed to Leonard Green's law office. The IP showed it came from a military server in Naples. The digital signature matched mine. Except I never sent it. I ran a trace. Something in my gut told me to dig deeper. I pulled logs from my secure terminal, then cross-referenced remote access alerts. And there it was. A single login attempt, tunneled through a civilian VPN. Origin, Charleston. I filed an immediate report with NATO's Cybersecurity Division. They launched an investigation, but in the meantime, my father's legal team moved faster. By morning, the story had hit the front page of the Post and Courier. Decorated officer faces, inheritance fraud. Internal NATO email may prove deception. I stared at the headline and thought, they don't even need to convict me. They just have to stain the name. He called it a dinner to clarify the Harris family's position. Old friends, extended relatives, former colleagues, even a few potential investors. Everyone was there. People who used to send Christmas cards, now watching the house like vultures circling roadkill. I hadn't planned to go, but staying away felt like surrender. So I arrived in black slacks, blazer, no insignia, no uniform. If they wanted a war, they weren't going to hide behind the American flag to fight it. I took the last seat at the far end of the table. No one made room. No one asked how I'd been. Dinner was served, roasted duck, wild rice, salad with cranberry vinaigrette, all perfectly plated. No one touched it. Then my father stood. He didn't clear his throat, didn't look at me. He simply pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker and set it beside his wine glass. He pressed play. A voice, my voice, filled the room. Just push it through. He's not thinking straight anymore. You know this is what he would have wanted. Gasps. A fork clinked against china. I felt 30 pairs of eyes burn into me at once. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. Cole stiffened beside her. I stood up slowly. That's not my voice. My father didn't blink. It's your tone. You always thought you were smarter than the rest of us. I looked around the room and saw exactly what he wanted me to see. Not a family, not friends, witnesses. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't owe them anything. I walked out, down the steps, into the warm, wet Charleston air. Rain had started falling hard. I reached my car, closed the door, and sat in the silence. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just stared through the windshield and thought, if they want war, I'll give them one. Not with fire, with truth. I walked into the Charleston County Courthouse in full dress uniform. Every eye followed me like I was a scandal in motion. My father sat front row, calm in a charcoal suit. Cole beside him, my mother behind, clinging to a tissue. The prosecution played the so-called unedited recording. My voice, they claimed. Expert analysis confirms it belongs to Captain Nicole Harris. I stood. Your Honor, I submit counter-analysis from NATO Cyber Defense. I explained how the recording was spliced from NATO training videos, stitched into a convincing deepfake. Then came NATO's official finding. The breach originated from a civilian IP in Charleston. The courtroom hushed. The judge allowed the findings into the record. My father didn't react. Not until later, in the hallway. You think NATO will protect you? I looked him in the eye. No, but I'll protect what matters. The truth. 3 days later, my mother called me home. She took me to the attic and pulled out my grandfather's old journal. On the last page, in shaky handwriting, Richard's pride will sink him. Nicole. She's the compass now. Before I could react, the attic door slammed open. My father stood there with a court order, seized the journal, and walked away. This is private property, not admissible. My mother said nothing. That night, I held my grandfather's compass, his words echoing in my mind. Hold steady, even if you're alone on the deck. I was completely. Then a message pinged. If you want the truth, ask Admiral Lowell. And with it, A final chance to pull the truth from the shadows. Admiral James Lowell didn't live in marble halls or gated estates. His cabin sat under tall pines, just beyond Charleston, where the wind whistled like ocean memory. When he opened the door, his face looked older than I remembered, but his eyes, still sharp, studied me like a map. "Nicole, Matt trusted you more than anyone. That's why he gave me this." He slid a small metal drive across the table. Military grade, labeled Echo Whisper 4. Hardware used to archive the final words of senior officers. Inside was a video. My grandfather, sitting up in a hospital bed, his uniform blanket pulled over thin shoulders. The Harris Fund, the house, the land, they belong to Nicole. She's earned it by duty, not by blood. Standing beside him, a forensic medical officer, confirming his mental clarity and stating he'd signed this testimony voluntarily. I asked why it had never seen daylight. "Because your father tried to seal it under privacy protections, and I let it happen. I didn't want to spark war in your family, but watching you speak in that courtroom, Matt would have stood beside you." I forwarded the footage to my attorney, retired Lieutenant Colonel William Reese. He filed it that same afternoon. At the same time, NATO sent an urgent military affidavit. Their cyber division had completed the trace. Every line of forged data, every second of that deepfake voice, originated from inside Harris Consulting, Cole's company. That evening, I drove to Beaufort Naval Cemetery. The air was still, and for once, the compass in my pocket didn't feel like a burden. I knelt by the stone marked Matthew J. Harris and traced the words, "Service above self." I placed my hand over the compass and whispered, "I found the trail, Grandpa. I'm following it all the way home." Court reconvened in a room buzzing with tension. The plaintiff's side tried to dismiss the Admiral's testimony. The judge shut it down without hesitation. I presented NATO's affidavit, IP logs, hardware signatures. All of it led to one place, Harris Consulting. The room shifted as eyes turned to Cole. He stood slowly, pale, shaking. "Was I just a target? Or did you ever see me as your sister?" He lowered his head. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I owed too much. 600,000. Gone. Dad said if I helped him, if I made the story believable, he'd cover it." The silence that followed cracked louder than any verdict. The judge turned to my father. "Mr. Harris, did you instruct your son to fabricate federal-level data to sway this court?" He said nothing, but his silence answered everything. Afterward, in the hallway, my mother approached, her face soft, tired. She placed a notebook into my hands. The journal, the one Dad had taken. I flipped to the last page. Beneath my grandfather's writing, one new line glowed in careful ink. "She doesn't need to prove herself. She already has." I held it to my chest, and for the first time since I returned to this house, to this courtroom, to this name, I cried. The courtroom was packed wall to wall, former officers in uniform, reporters scribbling in notebooks. A Navy representative sat near the back, arms folded tight, face unreadable. I walked in with steady steps, no longer a defendant, no longer unsure. I wasn't there to protect my reputation. I was there to protect something bigger, something he left me. Not the deed, not the fund, the truth. My father sat in his usual seat, tie crisp, back rigid, eyes cold. Judge Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her glasses, then addressed the room. "Before this court delivers its ruling, both parties may speak." He rose slowly. "I did what any father would do. My daughter chose the Navy over her own family. She left us for strangers. My father gave her everything, while I was left with nothing." He turned to face me, voice tight. "You were never a Harris in your heart." I stood. The compass felt heavy in my hand. In my other, the journal. I approached the stand, not with fire, but with clarity. "Your Honor, I wasn't raised to beg for recognition. I was raised to act when it counts. My father says I left the family, but family isn't proven through holiday dinners or last names. Family is who you protect when the storms come. I never asked for the land, the fund, not even the name. But I couldn't let a lie take its place beside the flag I swore to defend. I couldn't let silence dress itself as dignity. I turned to face my father, no longer speaking as his daughter, but as his equal. You say I don't carry the Harris name, but I didn't inherit it. I rebuilt it. For a moment, even the air held still. Someone in uniform in the back nodded once. Quietly, no gavel fell, no cameras clicked, no one applauded. But I felt it. That line between shame and truth had been crossed. I had nothing left to prove, only something to protect. Judge Eleanor Whitmore turned each page of the file with the kind of care usually reserved for something sacred. The room had gone still. No one breathed. Then she looked up. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Captain Nicole Harris. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. The sound of cameras clicking exploded like gunfire, but I didn't flinch. She continued, her voice clear and steady. This was never just about a will. This was about legacy, integrity, and truth. And truth, as this court sees it, does not hide behind emotion or entitlement. Then she looked at me, really looked at me. Captain Harris, you have not only defended yourself, but also the values your grandfather lived for. May you carry them forward. I gave her a slow nod, not of victory, but of understanding. Outside, the sky was overcast, and the wind had picked up. The flag above the courthouse snapped hard in the breeze. There was no applause, no crowd waiting to lift me on their shoulders. Just wind, just sky, just silence. And that was enough. That night, I stayed late at Colonel Reese's office, sorting through final documents and shredding copies we no longer needed. The adrenaline had long faded. What remained was a quiet sort of ache I couldn't name. The door opened. I looked up. It was my father. He said nothing at first, just stood there with a wooden box in his hands. Familiar. My grandfather's box. He stepped forward and opened it, revealing a silver ring, a navy ring. He gave this to me when I turned 21. He said, I never wore it. I didn't think I earned it. He held it out to me. His hands didn't shake, but something behind his eyes did. But I think you did. I didn't reach for it right away. I just looked at him. This man who had once tried to destroy me, now standing in the dim light of a lawyer's office, offering a piece of something he could never say out loud. When I finally took the ring, I didn't cry. I slipped it onto the pinky finger of my left hand, the hand that never touched a weapon, but always held the weight. No speech, no reconciliation, just a gesture. And somehow, that was more honest than anything he'd ever said. I didn't win in court. The truth did. And the truth didn't need applause. It only needed to be carried forward. A month after the verdict, I started full-time at the Charleston Veterans Transition Center. It wasn't glamorous, no medals, no command, just fluorescent lights, donated coffee, and a wall of resumes waiting to be rewritten. But for once, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I helped young veterans reframe their skills for civilian jobs. One had served in Fallujah, another had only just come back from Okinawa. Most carried stories they couldn't tell anyone outside these walls. In the break room, over stale donuts and coffee grounds, a boyish recruit named Connor asked me something that stopped time. Ma'am, what do you do when the people closest to you don't believe in you? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence land where it needed to. Then I smiled. You stand anyway. You salute life. Even when no one salutes back. That evening, I drove down to Beaufort again. The wind had shifted, gentler this time. The sea seemed quieter. I knelt beside my grandfather's grave and placed a small silver Navy insignia beside the old wooden compass. You were right, Grandpa. I didn't win the case. The truth did. I didn't destroy him. I forgave him. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my hands, and then, across the cemetery path, I saw him, my father. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just stood still, one hand tucked in his coat pocket. And then, He gave a single nod. Not a grand gesture, not a bow, just a quiet, deliberate nod. It was the first time he didn't look at me like I was the mistake. It was the first time I believed he saw who I'd become, not who I refused to be. I didn't wave, I didn't cry. I just nodded back. As I drove away, the courthouse flag came into view. Still flying, as always. But this time, it wasn't braced against the storm. It waved beneath a soft, forgiving sunset. I wasn't in uniform anymore. I wasn't saluted, but I was still standing. And this time, that was enough.